Let's see. All right, everyone settle down. My name's Ken Stano with the YouTube channel History X. Thanks for watching tonight. Another live crossover broadcast. Tonight we're going to be talking about the USS Intrepid. And pretty excited about this one. As always, we've got 3 YouTube channels involved. Buffalo Naval Park. Shane Stevenson, curator at the Buffalo Naval Park, is going to be joining us as always. Check out their YouTube channel, Buffalo. All you got to do is search for Buffalo Naval Park in the search bar, and it'll come right up. Or buffalonavalpark.org is their website. USS Slater, John Epp, curator, USS Slater in Albany. Check out their YouTube channel, USS Slater. USSSlater.org is the website. And we've got Connor Kilgore from the Museum Ships Facebook group. Let's get some faces up here. So Connor's going to be kind of checking out all of your comments, questions. Of course, we can't do this without subscribers and viewers. So submit your comments, submit your questions. What's the temperature where you are right now? I think it's like 2 degrees here in Minneapolis. Really? Let us know where you're from. Let us know where you're watching us, whether it's the Slater's website, the Buffalo Naval Parks. I'm sorry, not their website, the YouTube channel, the Buffalo Naval Parks YouTube channel, or my YouTube channel, History X. Let's see. All right. So, like I said.
Yeah, nice.
What?
Yeah, we've already got first comment.
Nice.
What comment?
Gotcha.
Let's see. Okay, so like I said, tonight we're talking about the USS Intrepid. We are fortunate enough to have Mike Fink, who is the author of a book called Intrepid's Fighting Squadron 18. What's going to be interesting about this for 2025 is that we've got a whole string of authors set up to join us from the U.S. Naval Institute Press. And so this is going to be a collaboration that we're going to be doing with them. Mike is going to be our first author / experiment. So,
test subject.
Yeah, exactly. Test subject. So Mike, thanks for joining us tonight.
Of course, it's a pleasure to be here.
Now, before we get started, I want to let everyone know that Mike has submitted a whole bunch of photos that he's going to share with us tonight. Many of the photos you will see are the property of the Intrepid Museum and cannot be utilized without their express written consent. So keep that in mind. Let's see. Now,
and some of them, just as an FYI, the museum does have a page on eMuseum. So some of this stuff is digitized and searchable. Others is still on the back end. They're working to get more of this stuff digitized for the public. That takes money and resources, obviously, as everyone on this podcast knows. So thank you, everyone listening, for your support, whichever institution you support, and helping us do what we do at our various museum ships.
Well said. Well said. So like I said a few moments ago, Mike wrote the book Intrepid's Fighting Squadron 18, and that is available through the U.S. Naval Institute Press, usni.org. Is that the best place to find your book?
Absolutely. Especially if you're a member. If you're a member, they get steep discounts on all titles through Naval Institute Press. So if you're interested in the subject, you can also become a Naval Institute member and then get some sweet deals on books. Otherwise, Amazon, all the usual outlets, it's available as well.
Now, like I said, Mike sent me a whole bunch of photos. Where do you want to begin when it comes to telling the story of the Intrepid?
Well, do you want to start? So there is sort of a top-down shot of the ship steaming with some planes on the flight deck. That's probably
Hold on a second
where
here.
the story makes sense to start from.
Yeah, I got that. Are you talking about this one right here?
That's the one.
All right.
And particularly fitting because the planes that you're seeing on the flight deck are from Intrepid's Air Group 18. It's the second combat air group that served aboard the ship during World War II. And we know that because, as we'll see in some subsequent images, there are tail markings associated with Air Group 18, which pick it out from the other air groups serving on different ships at this time, in particular in 44 and 45. The Navy would mark the tails, later on the wings, with specific icons. In Air Group 18's case, it was an equilateral cross, kind of like a plus sign. But yeah, the story for my book starts a little bit after Intrepid's service began. So the ship, the keel was laid down December 1st, 1941, before the attack on Pearl Harbor. And then the ship finally was commissioned August 16th, 1943. So the war had already begun. Some of the big battles in the Pacific we're familiar with have already been fought. And the offensive in the Pacific, the U.S. Navy's offensive, is really starting as Intrepid is coming on the scene. So early 1944, Operation Hailstone at Truk, the Marshall Islands, Kwajalein, Roy, Namur, those places in those Central Pacific atolls. That's when Intrepid first comes on the scene. And Intrepid's air group at that point, Air Group 6, is pretty well known. Even to this day, if you think of fighter pilots like Al Vrashu, who appeared on History Channel, Dogfight series, a lot of different places, Butch O'Hare trained a lot of the guys in Fighting Six, including Al Vrashu. So people tend to have heard of that air group, that squadron, even though they were only aboard Intrepid for a brief while. My book is about Intrepid's second combat group. It's Air Group 18, but I focus specifically on the fighting squadron, and they're not really as well known, which is why I thought maybe that they should be, well known. They're a very high scoring unit, the Navy's second highest scoring ace of World War II. Cecil Harris was among them. I think if you, besides the cover of my book, Ken, I sent you a few photos. There's one of two guys. It's probably later in the series.
Okay.
There's some aircraft behind them. They're facing one another. And the tail of one of the aircraft has kind of a marking that you can see there.
Is it this one right here?
That's the one. So Cecil Harris, the Navy's second highest.
You know what?
Scoring ace of World War II.
We're working out. We're doing this really well together. So
yeah, I think
it shouldn't be a problem.
Exactly. Yeah. So basically, you're looking at two of Intrepid's highest scoring aces of World War II, both from Intrepid's Fighting Squadron 18. Cecil Harris on the right, with 24 aerial victories to his name, and then Charlie Mallory to his left with 11. So Mallory in his own right, a double ace, even though he was also a photo recon pilot.
So and they were not aboard the first deployment, but the second.
That's correct. And actually, they were only in combat for 81 days. So Intrepid, when these guys came aboard, had already picked up sort of a reputation in the fleet. Some of the other museum ship folks and some of the Pacific War buffs will know this. But Intrepid, early on, coming through the Panama Canal, actually kind of ran aground a little bit before it had even seen combat. That was not a great omen.
It ran aground.
Yeah. So, the things being pretty narrow, I think it's the Gaillard cut, the Calibra cut, transiting that, Intrepid actually suffered damage and had to go to Hunter's Point and get repaired before even seeing combat. Not a great start, right, to the ship's history. And then in its first combat deployment, which only began in January, by mid-February, the ship is torpedoed off Truk after one day of operations during Operation Hailstorm. So damage after damage, the ship needing repair after repair. Some names circulating about Intrepid at this juncture in its history: the Dry Eye, the Decrepit, the Queen of the Dry Docks.
The decrepit?
Decrepit, yeah. You wouldn't want the ship's crew to hear you say that, obviously. Those were some of the names that were circulating at this time. And that was the, I guess, kind of the spirit, the context in which Air Group 18 first came aboard Intrepid.
Uh-huh.
By the same token, if you want to pull up the whole group photo, lots and lots of guys in front of the plane.
Right. That's number 22. That's this guy right here.
That's the one.
All right.
This is Fighting Squadron 18. This is the unit I wrote about. Most of these guys had not seen combat when they came aboard Intrepid. What makes Fighting 18, I think, so interesting is that they really only had one serious combat veteran before boarding Intrepid, and that was Cecil Harris. He had been in the Solomon Islands. He had participated in Operation Torch earlier in 1942, and so he had walked the walk and talked the talk, and he had 2 zeros to his name when he came aboard Intrepid. The rest of these guys really don't have any combat experience. They haven't seen enemy aircraft for the most case. Some of them have had.
Where did that one pilot get the 2 zeros?
Harris, so that was April 1st. It was ironically April Fool's Day, 1943, serving in the Solomons. So his squadron was detached from an escort carrier and they went and served in a land-based position for a short while before they rotated back to the States.
So that pilot, he hadn't even really, you said an escort carrier and land-based, he hadn't really worked off of a full-size carrier before either.
That's correct. Yep. So really none of those guys, I mean, the commanding officer, Murphy, he had served aboard Ranger, but he was a scout bomber. So he didn't have the fighter experience. You know, the leadership in the squadron had been promoted from within and were guys who had experience doing patrol work, doing bombing work, but they really didn't have that fighter experience. So it's very different from fighting Squadron 6, which I mentioned earlier, Intrepid's first fighting squadron that came aboard, and they already sort of knew the ropes. They had been on these other ships before coming to Intrepid, had already scored. And so you have this interesting dynamic where there's a ship with sort of a dicey reputation, but the crew is blooded. They've seen combat. They're kind of veterans in their own right. And then you have these officers, as opposed to enlisted men, who are coming aboard, but they don't have that experience. And so the war history for Fighting 18 kind of notes that they feel Intrepid's crew almost is like, oh, you guys are not, you know, you're not like Fighting 6 did it this way. Air Group 6 did it this way. You don't really know what you're doing. And so it's kind of an interesting look into how you have to overcome some of these kind of cultural and historical elements between a ship and its air group to get them wedded into a single effective fighting force.
Yeah, that's,
okay.
That's very
let me ask you a quick question. Okay. you're talking about this Squadron 18, you know, and they hadn't been on the Intrepid before. The Intrepid gets damaged before it even sees battle, you know, coming out of the Panama Canal, all that stuff. But when I was doing a little research about you, and this is on the Naval Institute website, you know, in the About the Author section, you spent 6 years researching this story in writing the book, correct?
Yeah, even, I mean, more if you want to go back to when it was kind of something I did really intermittently and was like kind of working on Wikipedia a little bit. Cecil Harris didn't have a Wikipedia page when I started this, and he's the Navy's second highest scoring ace in World War II with 24 victories to his name. I thought that was crazy. So,
well, but I guess my question is, what grabbed your attention about this story that made you want to write a book about it?
That was part of it. I mean, I had started working at the museum, actually started in the gift shop, and then started volunteering. And then when a tour guide position opened up, you know, I jumped on that, obviously.
And this is at the Intrepid Museum.
This is at the Intrepid Museum. So I'm walking the decks that these guys walked before me and having that experience of thinking of like, oh, what were they going through? And at that point, actually, I was older than most of these guys still, right? You think about how young these guys were. But what really struck me is I saw the stuff about Alexander Vrashu and Air Group 6, some information about the guys who came after Air Group 18, which was Air Group 10 in 1945. And there just wasn't that much, not only at the museum was where most of it was, but online. There was not really an online presence for Fighting Squadron 18 as successful as they were. And so that's what motivated me to start the project.
Okay, perfect. Sorry for interrupting. All right. So
no, that's good. You know, I don't know where we're going, and it's kind of, we're just throwing questions at you, Mike, but can you talk a little bit more about the camera recon, and did these, you know, because as they're doing Hailstone, they haven't seen many of these islands like in person, right? So they're also attacking while they're also taking photographs, things like that. So did you, in your book, talk a little bit about, you know, they had to fly at a higher altitude and they weren't strafing anything potentially, or like that transfer from fighter to recon cameraman is kind of interesting to me. Did you go into that in the book, or not so much, I guess, for lack of better words?
I had to a little bit. Now, the particulars of altitude and some of those other elements, I didn't dive into as much, the technical aspects of it, but it's a core part of Fighting Squadron 18's story. Ken, some of the later images I sent you, actually the one that we were looking at earlier with the cans of Reconnaissance film, if you want to pull those up.
You got it.
So part of what I did in the course of my research, because this is such
Beautiful.
a big part of the story, is I went to National Archives Cartographic and I pulled some reconnaissance footage from Air Group 18 aircraft, and was able to, through documents from Fighting 18's Combat Accomplishments dossier, also at National Archives, kind of piece together who was responsible for which images on which date, what kind of cameras they were using, things like that. And I did see specifically that they were asked to lay off from engaging with enemy aircraft and to really focus on the task at hand. And the images that you're seeing now are related to the invasion of Leyte, MacArthur's return to the Philippines. And that was the really important task when Fighting 18 first started operating in September 1944. So this is a negative. What you're seeing right now is a negative from a roll of film that actually came from one of these Hellcats of Tacloban, the capital of Leyte. And then I was able to, in the course of looking at newspaper photographs and things like that, say, oh, this is uncredited in newspapers for obvious reasons, security reasons. You're not going to say which carrier, which pilot, etc., was responsible for taking this photo. But I was able to actually find the same image in a number of newspapers across the United States and in an official press photo. Ken, I think that's the adjacent image, is the positive of this negative. Yep, what you're seeing right here. And so I was able to say, even though it doesn't say, it just says that it's a Navy, aircraft is responsible for this. This came from Air Group 18. This came from Fighting Squadron 18, which was
and this wasn't officially like a sanctioned or released photo to the press.
Yeah. So this one was, there were other images that were used by, or at least were in the collection of Army intelligence officers in advance of the invasion. So this obviously wouldn't have been in newspapers until after the fact. But they were also taking images that were distributed and being used by Army intelligence staffs in the planning phases for the invasion of Leyte. So these images were taken, September 12th, 13th, 14th, a good month and chains ahead of the invasion.
And then when you sent me this picture also, which this is reconnaissance. These are reconnaissance film cans, right?
Yep.
Or containers. Is the film when I see stuff like this and you think about how old these things are, and you got to handle these things as part of your job?
Yeah, it was really exciting actually to first kind of uncork these, because they are, when I say roll, you take them out. There's an apparatus at NARA Cartographic, and you lay it down and you unspool it, and it's all they're all connected. So these negatives are all kind of sort of taped together. They're a little brittle, and they've got handwritten, unlike this typed kind of sheet on the outside of it, they've got the handwritten date, the altitude, the kind of camera that took it. So that was the handwriting of the guys who were taking the film out, the intelligence officers who were responsible for looking at it, poring over it. It's 80 plus years of history that
it's 80 years old. You look at the date, what is that? September 14th of 44 is what I'm seeing on one of them. I mean, and you should know that you're talking to three curators, Shane, John, and Connor. They're I'm not, but I mean, so when you talk about stuff like this, I mean, you guys have to be kind of, I would imagine, drooling over this.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're here to talk about the book, and I don't want to skew it to like an archivist's dream here of talking about this stuff, because we want to hear more about the story of the Fighting Squadron and things like that. But there was, when you unrolled these, I'm just surprised that NARA didn't have these digitized, or, is there vinegar smell, or I don't know the composition, but is there, as soon as you take off the canister, do you have that nitrate, smell, that vinegar smell of degradation, things like that?
I don't know about vinegar. I'm trying to remember, because we're talking a couple of years ago now when I pulled these, but definitely old, musty, as you would expect.
Yeah.
And then while I was down there, basically I was just using my phone more or less on the light box to take images that I thought were interesting. And I was able to kind of piece them together because they're in sequence, and see, create sort of short video clips for myself to get a sense of like where am I looking at, not just what am I looking at, but where in the vicinity of Leyte, Luzon, where in the central and northern Philippines am I kind of looking at, and that was actually helpful in terms of thinking about what are these guys seeing. What is the kind of makeup of the islands out here? The central Philippines, there's so many islands, right? Mm-hmm. And in September and October, that's a kind of prime target for these guys. And they're having to neutralize so many air bases in advance of MacArthur's return to the Philippines. So all through September, that's basically what these guys are doing. And there's actually not that much enemy aerial activity in September. In fact, in the war history, I believe Admiral Halsey, is quoted as saying something like, "It's unbelievable and fantastic how little aerial opposition there is as the Navy is kind of pushing further and further north." This is a period of softening up the Palaus for the invasion of Peleliu, which Air Group 18 participates in September 17th. This is kind of pushing into the Visayas, the central Philippines, pushing closer and closer to Japan. Right. And yet there's not this kind of strong response, with the exception of, I think, September 13th and 21st, two kind of scuffles that take place. There's not any real big air battle yet for Fighting 18 in September.
So Fighting 18 was basically sitting on their hands quite a bit then.
They're eager young guys who they're frustrated. Right. And we were talking earlier about Intrepid suffering damage. The torpedo strike to Intrepid took months and months to fix, to the point where the ship was quote unquote fixed and came down to Hawaii. And when they tried to leave, there was all of the shaking. One of the shafts, was having problems. They were indicating issues with the bearing, and the ship had to return to Hawaii and have a little bit more repair. And this is happening again. Think about when this is happening. We're overlapping June, the Marianas Turkey shoot, right? This is the fighter pilot's dream, and they're missing this opportunity because their ship, it has all of these problems. Again, this experience of coming aboard the ship and being like, kind of why Intrepid initially.
Gotcha.
So were they under both Spruance and Halsey, like during their 81 days? Had it transferred from 38 or fleet? Third Fleet to Fifth Fleet, or
solidly Third Fleet. So they're as they're in transit to the combat zone, it's still 58, but by the time that they're actually seeing action, it's solidly Task Group 38. They're in Task Group 38.2. In September, Intrepid is not yet the flagship of that task group, but in October that changes. Admiral Bogan comes aboard. Intrepid becomes his flagship of Task Group 38.2. And October is really when the activity steps up significantly for these guys. And you can see, if you want to, Ken, switch to, there's a good image of a plane on an aircraft elevator to see a kind of a closer look at.
I think, hold on a second. I think that's number 13.
While Ken finds this, would you like to point out that we have Jim Murphy in the chat tonight?
I'm seeing the comment, Ed. The Skipper Murphy. We'll have to pull up that photo because we have a good one, Navy press photo of Murph, as the guys called him, kind of over a knee plot board, and some of the members of the squadron like listening in intently. They're still in training at this point, but it's a great photo.
Real quick, is that I think that's this one right here, right?
That's the one. Yep. So Murphy on the right there, he is the commanding officer of Fighting 18. And I think he's got a tough task. As I was saying earlier, in a lot of these squadrons, the guy who's in charge, he's been a fighter for a while. Maybe he's seen some combat. Maybe he's got some Valor awards already. In the case of Fighting 18, Commander Link, who is training these guys into early 1944, is given another command, and men are promoted from within to suddenly have to manage the guys they were side by side with earlier. That's no easy task in combat. If you've ever been in a job where that's the case, right? It's tough to suddenly find yourself in that position of authority. And I think he did a remarkable job kind of with that circumstance. So that's Skipper Murphy, Ed Murphy on the right there. And then from left to right, On the left side of the image is Charlie Mallory. Punchy was his nickname in the squadron. We've got Fred Wolf there in the middle. He's one of the tough guys, I would say, in Fighting 18, a boxer, football player. Grew up under real tough circumstances, lost his mother at an early age, but was able to kind of get himself straight and get on the straight and narrow. And then one of the squadron's troublemakers, John Meyer, they called him Snuffy, on the right there with the big grin and his goggles up on his forehead.
Mm-hmm. All these guys.
Yeah, so how we see a comment from Marilyn Murphy. And did you work with the Murphy family, that her and her brothers, I think she was saying that they worked with you for this book?
They did. And I'm extremely thankful and extremely fortunate. When COVID happened, as was the case for many people around the country, around the world, for the museum, it was closed. I was furloughed. There wasn't really much museuming to be done at that juncture. And I found myself with a lot of time, and I had already kind of started this project. So I said, if I'm going to do this, I may as well do it right. And I may as well go beyond the archival resources and try to find out more about these guys. 2020, a lot of them have since passed. I'm on the later end of trying to capture these stories. Thankfully, a lot of museum ships, including Intrepid, have oral history projects and try to record these and have done so for a while. But in my case, during COVID, I just began cold calling people to the best of my ability, reaching out to as many families as I could, finding obituaries of these guys, kind of playing detective a little bit, finding a paper trail and reaching out to as many families as possible. So a couple dozen squadron families, actually, I was able to make connections with over the course of my experience and be able to see those really personal things. Actually, in the case of Skipper Murphy, he was a hell of an AC-doocy player. And his AC-doocy board, his backgammon board with the squadron's insignia painted on it, is still in the Murphy family. They've got it preserved, and I've been able to see images of it. So that part of the story was really important to me, and I really wanted to make sure that was communicated in the book. Who were these guys? What were they like? What did they enjoy? What were their aspirations? What were their relationships? And that just doesn't exist in a lot of the archival material, because for the military, that's not really important, right? That's extraneous. You need to know what the mission is, how many enemy aircraft were destroyed, who did you lose? Anything else is just clogging that up, because these papers are going to be filed higher and higher, and people are going to make them more abstract with the statistics as they go along. So I wanted to get back into the, who these guys were part of the story.
For those of you that are just joining us, we're talking to Mike Fink, who is the author of a book that's being published by the U.S. Naval Institute Press, Intrepid's Fighting Squadron 18. Check out the U.S. Naval Institute Press. What is it? USNI.org to learn more about Mike's book. A few moments ago, you had me pull up this slide here, which this is a Hellcat, correct?
That's correct. And this Hellcat and many of the others that were used by the squadron were F6F-5 model Hellcats. So they had some nice upgrades that the guys appreciated very much. They had water injection, or war emergency power, as it would have been known in all the manuals and such. A nice little boost of power if you need it in a pinch. They had spring tab ailerons. So
well, wait, hold on a second. Yeah. So WEP, I'm sorry, what does WEP stand for again? War emergency power. Yeah. And while I'm not a video game player, I know that that's a pretty big thing if people are playing the World War II games, to throw in that war emergency power. But you're saying that is a result of water injection?
Yep.
I never knew that.
It seems like a simple thing, but it was really, a big deal at the time. The F6F-3 was a very capable aircraft, and in fact, there were those earlier models flown by members of Fighting 18 as needed. They were losing aircraft in October 1944 as a result of strike activity. In September, even as a result, less of engagement with enemy aircraft and more with anti-aircraft artillery, flak. That's actually really the big fear of a lot of these guys. They felt pretty confident in their combat abilities. But if you get unlucky against anti-aircraft artillery, there's not a whole lot you can do. You might not even see it, right? So they really loved the Hellcat. It was a sturdy, rugged aircraft. It could take a real serious beating and get back to the ship, or at least give you time to get out of it if you needed to. So the guys really wrote over and over again, whether it was Air Group 18, Fighting 6, whoever it was, but they loved Grumman, the Ironworks, and they loved the Hellcat.
Before we move on, John, Connor, you guys got any questions?
I do have one. So obviously, quite a number of what you mentioned earlier, the second most successful pilot went on board, flew aboard the Intrepid. The Intrepid more or less exclusively fly Hellcats as their fighter aircraft, or did they get Corsairs as well?
So later on, they got Corsairs, and in fact, that's a really nice segue to just plug the museum a little bit. An FG-1D Corsair just entered the museum's collection. It's in restoration. It's going to be moved into the hangar deck in Hangar 1. They're planning on doing that this month, and then later in March, that area of the ship is going to reopen to the public with an all-new World War II exhibition. It's the first time since 2008 the museum has significantly redone its permanent exhibition. There's going to be never before seen artifacts that are in place there, and a brand new restored Corsair. So yes, Corsairs in 45, and Corsairs to a lesser extent earlier in night fighting squadrons. So that was the case, for example, in early 44 with Night Fighting Squadron 101, which was aboard Intrepid.
Okay. Fascinating. I love the Hellcats personally. Fell in love with them with those old dogfight documentaries on History Channel back in the day, and I've loved them ever since. So.
Yeah, they're not visually, right? The Corsair gets a lot of love because it's such a striking looking aircraft. It also obviously a very, very capable aircraft. But when you think about when the Hellcat came online, that it came online when it was needed and was able to kind of hold the line through 1944 until the Corsair all the sort of issues were worked out of it. And it was able to, Corsair groups, fighting squadrons and fighter bomber squadrons were able to come on board ships like Intrepid in increasing number.
Someone has a question. Harold already made a comment that he visited the Grumman Iron Works. I guess that's GIW, right? And then he said it's one of the best days. Can you explain a little bit more about? They were the manufacturers, but they also had a steel plant connected to it, or?
Well, that was just a nickname, actually, the Ironworks, because of how tough their planes were.
Gotcha.
Oh,
okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah, out on Long Island.
Yeah,
So that was the reputation. The Avenger, the Hellcat, the Wildcat, right? In comparison, certainly with their Japanese counterparts like the G4M, the Zero, whether it was bombers, fighters, whatever the case might have been. They had a reputation for you put a bullet in them and they start smoking. And that just wasn't the case with these Grumman aircraft. They could take, there's a story in the book. I don't want to give too much away because obviously I want you guys to be interested and read it, but there's a great story. And actually, Ken, if you want to pull up the picture of the landing signal officer with the paddles. Oh yeah. This is a good time for that. In September 44, during operations over the Philippines, there's a guy in the squadron named Bryant Walworth. Everyone calls him Wally. And as they're kind of leaving the strike area, he can feel that his aircraft is not really responding well to his controls. He can't see what's wrong. He's not injured, and he's got guys around him who are saying, you're okay. You'll be able to get back to the ship. It's not a big deal. And so he kind of wrestles, and sweats. Because again, for people who aren't familiar, there's no fly-by-wire at this time. You're physically moving your plane, through the air. So when you have this damage to your aircraft, you're pushing, you're pulling, you're hours away from your ship. You're in the Pacific in September. You are sweating. And finally, he manages to make it back to Intrepid. He gets to the landing signal officer. This is actually him. This is Richard Moot, or Rit Moot, as he was known. And the landing signal officer's job, he has those paddles there, is to wave you in and to tell you what's wrong with your approach so you can correct it before you land. And this is a life or death kind of a thing. And in fact, the landing signal officer has the power to tell you, no, in fact, you can't land. And when Wally Walworth comes around, he, initially gets, a wave off. He says, no, there's no way that you can make a safe landing here. I need you to come back around. And on his next pass, he's still high and fast, but Moot, the landing signal officer, makes the determination, if I let you go around again, or if I make you go around again, you probably are not going to make it. You might crash. You might not survive this. So he gives him the cut. He slashes the paddle across his chest in the cut sign further out than he normally would. Because again, Walworth is coming in high and fast. Walworth catches the wire, the 3-wire. He makes one of the best landings, of his career as a naval aviator. He gets to see the whole flight deck, out in front of him. And he's brought back safe and sound thanks to Moot. And when he gets out of his Hellcat and he circles around to look at his plane, the back end of the fuselage, there's a hole that's, foot in diameter or whatever it is. All of his control cables, with the exception of one little strand, these are braided cables. There's one strand holding on that is giving him, control over his rudder. And if that had gone, who knows what might have happened. But as a testament to what this plane could take, if you have a hole that you can look through, in the back of your aircraft, that you put your whole arm through in the back of your aircraft, and you can still bring it safely back to the ship. That's pretty impressive.
So he was literally hanging on by a thread, I guess.
Yeah, literally.
Yep.
So this massive hole is there, and his buddies tell him, "Oh, you can make it back to the carrier."
So according to his account, and I've been fortunate, again, this is another family I've been in touch with, and have listened to him. His son Lee recorded some conversations that he had with his father, both on an audio recorder and on video. So I've actually got to see it as well, which is really neat. He recorded those stories so that I could hear it firsthand from the guy who experienced it. I don't have to just rely on the reports. And in fact, this is another example where I would not have known, looking at the aircraft action report, who this was, whose Hellcat was damaged, without being in touch with the family. The action reports will list damage to planes, but they're typically, unless the person's injured, they're not going to tell you who that was. They're just going to say this Hellcat bureau number, whatever, had this kind of damage, and that's that, and you'll never know who it was. So reaching out to the families has helped me solve some of these puzzles in the aircraft action reports by connecting these threads. How many planes were damaged? Oh, it's just this one that suffered damage like this. Oh, the account matches the damage described in the action report. It's kind of special.
Okay, fascinating.
Hey, John, did you have a question?
Yeah, you had touched on it a bit earlier. I know you started this later, but did you have the chance to physically talk to anybody from Squadron 18, or were you really relying on the oral histories?
So I had two big opportunities. One, early in my research, actually right when I started working for the museum, I was able to get in touch with Chuck DeMoss, who was out on the West Coast, and he was one of the last surviving members of the squadron. And that was, again, this is the first guy I'm getting to talk to who actually served in the squadron. And I'm like over the moon. This is 2017. I tell the museum, even though I've just started working for them, I say, hey, I got in touch with a World War II aviator. And they say, oh, this is great. They look into it. They send a team out, an oral history team, an interviewer, a camera, et cetera, to the West Coast to talk with him, interview him, take some pictures of his logbook, all of that. So he was my first experience. And then more recently, and of course, sadly, he has since passed. All of these guys would be in their hundreds. Yeah. By now. They're officers at this stage of the war. I got the chance during COVID to speak with another member of the squadron, Larry Donahue. And that was really special because Larry was 102 when I spoke with him and was very sharp. Like, remembering stories from being in the ready room, and he was also an interesting case because there's a lot of guys who support the squadron who don't fly. There's a flight surgeon. There's an air combat intelligence officer. In the case of Larry, he was an engineering officer. He was the guy who was really responsible for the enlisted men looking over the Hellcats for the squadron. So I got to learn a little bit more about his kind of engineering perspective and his relationship as a non-flying officer to the other men in the squadron. So those were the two, Chuck DeMoss in 2017 and Larry Donahue during COVID. And actually, Larry lived to be 104. He's since passed, but that's a pretty amazing testament to it's good genes and taking good care of yourself, never hurts. So he was razor sharp. So I was really, really fortunate. And his family, actually, by that point in COVID, his family reached out to me. I had been posting on blogs on Facebook and Instagram. And that was one of the first instances where now I've done enough to get stuff out there in the public to fill this hole where Fighting 18 was, that the families are starting to learn about it on their own and reach out to me. And that was another kind of special moment. It signaled to me that like I'm on the right track. I'm helping to preserve and honor these guys' memory for their service and sacrifice.
Mike Fink is the author of Intrepid's Fighting Squadron 18. Definitely suggest you check it out. You can go to www.usni.org and check out their book section. That's the Naval Institute Press. Happy to have him on. I am going to get a little selfish here because I want to ask you about a feature of the Intrepid. I know we kind of traded some emails about it, but the Intrepid, being an Essex-class aircraft carrier, had a unique feature that really no other aircraft carrier had, which was the ability to launch a plane sideways. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. There were only 6 carriers that could do this, and the Intrepid was one of them.
Yeah, so it's an interesting feature, right? And it seems almost counterintuitive when you think about the physics of all of this. So in the case of these early Essexes, they had these sponsons and the infrastructure put in place so that they could ultimately have a catapult installed. A smaller number of carriers is this Hornet, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Did actually have the catapult apparatus installed. Intrepid didn't get to that point.
Oh, no, it didn't. Oh,
so Intrepid had the sponsons. Intrepid had some of the underlying architecture that would be necessary to complete this process. But maybe fortunately, due to suffering this early damage in February, they instead put a second catapult on the flight deck level, which would become, the norm. And they scrapped the idea of, the athwartships, this hangar deck level catapult. So Intrepid didn't really launch planes this way. And the Navy generally sort of found out quickly that wasn't ideal. And they would rather have this kind of setup that you're seeing now, that 11 on the bow in the center is Intrepid's hull number. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a really cool feature, and something that I think inspires a lot of museum ship fans to keep digging. It's all these little features that change so dramatically over such a short period of time. World War II is such a potent period of technological change that from month to month, from visit to dry dock to the next visit to dry dock, some pretty significant and interesting things can change aboard a ship.
Definitely.
Yeah, unbelievable. So Mike, were there any fighters that you didn't get information on, that you gathered? I mean, names, a little of the family histories, all of that fabulous stuff that rounds out books like yourself with the historical and personal stories and family, where they grew up, all of those things. But if there were any, was there a rough count of how many you just could not find information on, whether that's even their name or then even more than likely like their backstory, things like that?
Yeah, a lot of times the guys I ran into that problem with were replacement pilots. So in October, you have a lot of action happening. You've got the Ryukyu strikes. You've got Formosa, what we call Taiwan today. The Formosa air battle being, not well known today, but really the biggest air battle in the Pacific. I mean, through the course of the entire war. Statistically, it's just this huge undertaking by the Japanese to try to strike back at Halsey's Third Fleet, committing hundreds of aircraft. It's like 700 something aircraft over the course of just a handful of days. Not successful ultimately, but we're talking, a toll being taken on Fighting 18 and on a lot of other air groups and squadrons. And after the Formosa air battle, October 18th, 19th, that vicinity, before the big naval battle that will take place, that's well known today, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Fighting 18 gets a big influx of aviators from different squadrons to make up for the loss of so many people over the course of that week. October 12th, actually, it's 4 guys. So 4 members of Fighting 18 are missing in action at the end of that one day. And one of them, one additional member of the squadron, Egidio Di Battista, is so injured that he has to end his combat deployment. He breaks his leg bailing out of his ship. So what you're seeing here is the squadron's photo roster. This is the original kind of members of the squadron. When you're looking at a squadron like this, it's like 65 or so people. When I was looking at the roster for the squadron through the course of its whole deployment, the number ballooned to closer to 100 because of the number of replacement pilots who come in over the course of their 81 days in service.
You had sent along, well, after you shot me down on my cross catapult thing that I wanted to talk about so badly, only to find out that the Intrepid didn't have one. I'm hurt.
Womp womp. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. All right. But in a lot of this, in some of the images that you had sent me, these guys, I don't know.
This is a story of triumph and tragedy, I would say, is what this picture says to me. And I try to capture a little bit of this in the book. This is one of the youngest guys in the squadron. And as it would happen, a lot of the men who didn't come home were the younger guys. And, we can kind of hypothesize why that might have been. They're a little less afraid of danger. They don't have a family yet, that maybe they don't have kids yet. There's less that's going to restrain them from diving, being the first person to dive into combat. You can kind of psychologize it a little bit, although you have to be careful because, you really need evidence to back stuff like that up. But in the case of Arthur Mollenauer, the gentleman we're looking at here, the guys called him Mo. He's like one of the best examples that I can think of in the squadron of working your way up and really being committed to being a naval aviator. He started as an aviation machinist mate, and he was a Mustang. He moved from being enlisted and not being on the path, not having the education or the background to be an officer, a naval aviator, but he worked so darn hard that he made it happen. And he was recommended by his supervising officer, and he became a naval aviator. And he actually was fighting Squadron 18's one of their only aces in a day. He shot down 5 enemy planes in one day on October 12th over northern Formosa, northern Taiwan.
And he was one of the youngest pilots, and he had that kind of a record.
He was one of the youngest guys. The photo, the art photo that I sent you, it's like a sort of a watercolor and pen drawing, is one of his squadron mates' interpretations of an interview that took place. I think you'll see it. It's like 2 guys. Yeah, there we go. That's perfect. Okay. So this is done by Ed Ritter. He's a member of Fighting 18. He's a photo escort pilot. So the guys we were talking about earlier who are taking photos of the lay of the land, they need escorts as well. They're going to be potentially attacked by enemy planes. So Ed Ritter would escort those photo pilots out. But he was also a very talented artist. He's from Brooklyn. He was an ad artist before the war and after the war, in fact. And so he had watercolors. He had some of his tools of the trade that he brought aboard Intrepid. And while he was aboard ship, he produced about 24 of these watercolors. And this one is his interpretation of Arthur Mollenauer doing what pilots do so often, speaking with his hands, kind of giving the war correspondents the straight dope there while a photographer takes his picture, and telling them, you know, what happened, what he saw, how he did what he did, how he became an ace in a day. And then over his head is what Ed Ritter envisions Mollenauer is really thinking about, right? It's these guys, you know, being an ace is great back home, publicity, whatever, but really what these guys wanted was to do their job and get home, right? No one really wants to be out there fighting. And
Wait, and are you saying it's this guy right here that did that? Did that drawing?
No, so Ed is a different fellow, and I have a picture.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I apologize.
We can get to that in a little bit, because I've got another photo I sent you that we can use to sort of illustrate this.
Okay.
But the gentleman we were just looking at, the photo we were looking at, this is him talking about becoming an ace in a day. Got it. I know that this is that pilot because of a clue that I was able to follow visually in the image. You might notice on the pilot's temple, on his head, there's a bandage, right? You see that little sort of X in where his widow's peak goes. On October 13th, the day after he became an ace in a day, after landing back aboard ship, Mollenauer's plane, parked aboard Intrepid, was hit by another aircraft, and he suffered an injury to his head. And this is in the military records. You know, it's very clear that this is him, and this was one of those clues. The other big clue is in the image, the dreamscape behind him, this sort of imagined future where he's on the lazy boy, he's got the pot belly, he's telling the kids the story. It says mows him down, and that's Arthur Mollenauer. His nickname was Mo, and then it's got his Valor Awards under it. And again, to not give too much away, there's plenty of stories, so I don't feel too bad about sharing what's in the book. But after becoming an ace in a day, October 12th over Formosa, a couple weeks later on October 29th, at the point after the Battle of Leyte Gulf, after kamikaze attacks, organized kamikaze attacks, have introduced themselves and become an increasing fact and threat for the U.S. Navy, as Fighting Squadron 18 is trying to smother that threat and destroy as many planes on the ground as they can on Luzon. Mollenauer is shot down and killed. So this imagined future that Ritter penned for Mollenauer of getting to share this story with his children and getting to enjoy what he fought for, that American dream, does not ultimately come to pass. And that, when I was able to put two and two together there and kind of see that story, it was really a gut punch. And I've, as you can probably imagine, have become very emotionally kind of bound up in the story of the not only the squadron, but the individual members whose families, children, grandchildren, etc. I've gotten to know over the course of this research and writing.
So you're presented with this pen and watercolor drawing, and it looked to me, hold on a second, that it was a gift of Edward Arthur. Oh, so it came from the family of the guy that created this.
Correct.
But they didn't present the story to you. You had to look at this and really put some clues together to figure out who is depicted in this drawing. So that did that give you chills when you finally put two and two together and you realize who this was?
It was eerie, and I think it motivated me. You know, subsequently, I was able to reach out to members of the Mollenauer family. I was able to find online, thanks to other members of the family who had posted some photos of Mo, more information about him. He was Santa Barbara, California's first ace. So he's not only an ace in a day, he was his, hometown hero at the time. And then after his loss, the local airport actually named one of the roads, kind of between service roads, between runways, after him. So there's a photo online of his father, himself a World War I veteran who fought for his country, standing in this bittersweet moment in front of this marker that's named for his son who didn't come back from war.
Wow.
Yeah, there's, when you start digging, there are definitely stories that emotionally can drain you very quickly. And I'm sure John has that. And he's looking through some of his collections. I certainly do. Yeah, you'll just like kind of get stopped dead in your tracks, and you'll put that piece together with another piece of information, and it could be a real emotional drain.
I
Like
believe
gut
it.
punch, as you called it.
Yeah, and the
Connor
art
might have had that too.
the art really sheds light into these individual stories and to the more general experience. Ken, I think there's a photo actually of Ed. There's a photo of some guys flanking a seated officer. He's got a pad of paper in his lap and he's sort of bent over it.
Yeah, hold on a second. I know where that is.
Yeah.
Bear with me a second here.
Sure.
So
what we're going to see,
I think. Wait. No, I don't. Was it 26? What? It's.
Let's see.
Is it this one? No.
No. I think it's before that.
Okay.
Let's see.
19. Hold on a second.
Yeah. Aha, that's the one.
This one? But okay. All right.
So if you look, what he's sketching here, this is another one of those 24 or so artworks. He's kind of anthropomorphizing a Hellcat. He's giving a Hellcat like human characteristics. It's tired, it's worn out, it's sweating, its tongue is hanging out.
The tail's dragging.
Exactly, right. And he called this Zoomies First Strike. And these guys referred to themselves. This wasn't an official nickname or anything, but they were the Zoomies. And you can kind of see on Ed Ritter's brim, the artist's brim of his hat, he's written the word Zoomies, and it's got kind of eyeballs in lieu of the O's.
I see it. Yeah.
And like I said, he was a photo escort pilot. So we again see Charles Punchy Mallory behind him with the ring on his finger. Standing behind both of them is Harvey Picken. He was actually the lead photographic officer for Fighting 18's photo unit. And then Redmond Beatley, the guys called him Beetle because he was on the smaller side, right behind Ed Ritter. So he did a number of these where it was like the Hellcat's tired and the pilot bends down and kisses the deck. He's so happy to have made it through his first strike. And there's another one where the ship, friendly ships are shooting at him and he's waving, a white flag and he has some kind of, quick off the cuff remark. It's kind of indicative of the squadron that's going through its formative experience aboard Intrepid. Yeah. The pitfalls of their everyday life. There's a really good one of a pilot getting ready to take off with a number of enlisted men on the deck. They're holding up signs. What is point option? That's where the ship is going to be when they return. How to get your way back to Intrepid over this big empty ocean. All of this different information, and you're trying to absorb it as you're getting ready to operate this big piece of machinery and go on this dangerous combat mission. And Ed Ritter has made this kind of comical by making one of those guys hold a sign that says Burma shave.
That was pardon me, that's funny.
So there's a lot of little, they're really beautiful. And actually the artwork that's on display here, a reproduction of it is actually in the hangar deck of the Intrepid Museum as part of one of their exhibitions, which is really neat.
Do you know if Ritter continued his artwork after the war as a career or just a hobby?
He definitely continued as an artist. His granddaughter, Val, put together, how you can kind of make a self-published book. She was able to take a lot of photos of his collection of art, his wartime service materials, photos of him, as he got older, photos of the family, and kind of put together a keepsake book like that. And she was actually the first Squadron family member that I interviewed in person because she was nearby. I was able to go kind of talk to her in person and learn more about Ed through someone that knew him, someone that interviewed him and kind of was close to him. Yeah. He continued his pursuits as an artist. I find that, some of these guys had the flying bug, as you can imagine, fighter pilots. Why do you become a fighter pilot? You want the fastest plane, the plane that you can do the most kind of cool stuff with. A number of them stayed aviators later in life. Robert Brownell, who the guys called Brownie, maintained a flying service well into his silver years. We're talking like in his 80s or so. So it was kind of a mixed bag of who continued with their pre-war pursuits and who struck out in new territories.
Yeah.
This is a great photo. This is the deck crew for Intrepid. Kneeling at bottom right again is Rit Moot. He's got the paddles there. But another member of the deck crew, the deck officer actually for Intrepid at this time, is a name that baseball fans might recognize, and it's written actually on the left side here. So the fourth name down, Charlie Devins. He was on. Yeah, does that ring any bells?
I couldn't tell you the team, but yeah.
As for New York, you're on the right track, because although he didn't start there, he was on one of the Yankees World Series teams, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
Wow.
In the 1930s. You'll have to fact check me on that, because I'm trying to pull this back through the mist and the memory. But yes, he was a professional baseball player. So kind of a neat Intrepid connection to sports there.
Yeah, so I do have a couple questions. For starters, there was a question. Actually, there's two questions, both
ahead.
from my dad. The first is, does the Intrepid have any Helldivers on display?
Not currently. There was a period of time where the museum had some replicas, some scale, 1-to-1, pretty well done replicas of a Hellcat and a Helldiver. And at a point before I started working for the institution, the decision was made, and it's one that I think makes a lot of sense, to make sure that all of the aircraft on display were the genuine article, the real McCoy. And so those aircraft, found new homes, those models found new homes, and actual aircraft were brought in their stead. So right now the museum, in terms of World War II planes, has a TBM 3E Avenger, the FG-1D Corsair that will be on display starting later in March, and sort of one that straddles the category, an XTBD something or other, the prototype model of the AD-1 Sky Raider. So that is a 1940s, late 1940s aircraft, the kind of precursor to the SPAD that would become, so effective through the course of its career with the Navy.
The other question was, knowing that Intrepid was involved in the attack on Musashi, were there any participants from Fighting 18? Yes,
this is a great segue, actually. So I appreciate that question. Ken, there's a photo with two guys standing in front of a Hellcat. It's got kind of a black border. That might be enough to
hold on a second here. So I don't think you're talking about this one here.
Not that one.
Okay.
You can see their full bodies, and there's only one plane, and you can kind of see the front end of it.
Oh, 15. It kind of got, when I imported it, I think it's this one.
That's the one.
All right. Yeah. It kind of got chopped.
That's more or less the gist of it. And this photo, I was really fortunate. I've been in touch with the families of both of these men. They were the Hellcat pilots in Search Sector 3 on the morning of October 24th. The ones that found Admiral Kurita's battleships. So these two men in their Hellcats, along with the plane they were escorting, which was a Helldiver piloted by Russell Adams, Max Adams is what the guys called him. These three aircraft left Intrepid, crack of dawn, before the sun is even up, in fact, went out looking for Japanese battleships, and sure enough, they were able to find them. They sent the message that actually was read by, which reached Admiral Halsey, that led him to say, strike, repeat, strike, good luck, and kicked off the carrier action at the Battle of Leyte Gulf. So that message came from the gentleman at right. He was the section leader for these two men. He's Lieutenant Don Watts. And then at his left is Lieutenant Junior Grade Paul Ammerman. The guys called him Boot, or I've seen one artifact where Boot was lengthened to Boot Nose. So I don't know if there was something about his features or an in-joke in the squadron. Cecil Harris's nickname was Speedball, and that had to do with softball games they played in training. So there's some interesting backstories to some of the way these guys get their nicknames. But yes, so in answer to your question, Intrepid was really at the center of the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea. That introductory carrier battle at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement, in modern history, certainly, potentially in world history. It depends on what metrics you're talking about, if you want to get technical there. But yeah, Intrepid was right at the center of it, and these guys were the ones who kicked off the action.
Mhm.
I want to go back to this picture here, because I think I'm getting the hang of the value of your book isn't necessarily about an aircraft carrier or a particular plane, but it's about some of these guys and the detective work you had to do. Because when you look at the guy on the left-hand side, and then you're telling stories, I got to pull up this other picture, like this picture here, that's also the guy on the left-hand side, right?
I don't think so, just because that is the guy on the left-hand side in my photo, not my photo, they're both my photos, but the other photo, Charles Mallory, was an aviator with Fighting 18. The gentleman in the photo excerpt there,
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
I don't recognize.
Because
I assume
you talk about doing detective work, and I'm sure you get to know these faces when you go through all these pictures, right?
Yeah. Some of them are really striking. I don't think I included a photo of him here, but there's one gentleman in particular who's like 6'4.5", built big, face craggy,
easy to pick out,
very easy to pick out in a lineup. And actually, this was an unusually tall squadron. There were a few guys who were about 6'4", and to shoehorn yourself into the cockpit of a World War II era fighter plane, you really have to want it at that point, because it's certainly not going to be comfortable. Frank Foltz, Spider, they called him, because he was so lanky and long that they reminded him of a spider. And there's actually, I can spin yarns all day, but there's a story that has some bearing on a photo that I shared. The real question is, this was going to be a more difficult one to describe. Let me see which batch I sent it over in, and that might help make it easier.
I'll give it a try
for the both of us. It looks like it was in or did I send it over? Actually, now that I'm looking at the photos, it's a photo of a single guy. I did. It's one of the early ones. It's 4.
Oh, okay. Hold on a second.
That's Harvey Picken. He was the leader of the photo recon unit. That's a really good photo. His daughter Jackie sent me.
I think is it this guy?
It is. It
Okay.
is. Which is. I just thought this was such a cool photo. I have a few different images of this gentleman. It's Bill Daniels. And he actually later became extremely wildly successful, bringing cable TV north of the Rockies, or west of the Rockies, I should say, and kind of built an empire there, and became very, very philanthropic in his later age. But during World War II, initially he was a fighter pilot. He served in a unit that kind of was side by side of Cecil Harris's unit. So he had the same kind of trajectory. He served in Operation Torch, served in the Solomons, but then his kind of path diverged from Harris's. Instead of continuing to be a fighter pilot, he said, I'm really interested in technology. What I want to do is I want to become a fighter director. I want to become an intercept officer. I want to learn about radar. And I want to be the guy on the ship who's looking at this newfangled thing and saying, you got to go Angels 10, 270 Buster, you got to go 270 degrees, 10,000 feet, and you got to make the best speed. He wants to be the guy in your ear, talking to you on the radio. And that's sure enough, that's what he did. He was Intrepid's intercept officer. He was a fighter director, and he was the guy talking to a lot of members of Fighting Squadron 18, telling them, hey, there's a threat coming towards our ship. The fighter pilots are not only on the offense, they're protecting the fleet. They're circling the fleet and making sure that any Japanese threat's not going to get through. And the first line of defense is that radar. It's guys like Bill Daniels in their ear telling them where they need to be.
Gotcha. I want to remind everybody that we are talking to Mike Fink, author of Intrepid's Fighting Squadron 18, available from the U.S. Naval Institute Press. We have had you on for a little more than an hour, and I appreciate your generosity with your time. But there's one more picture I want to throw. You know, some of these pictures you sent my way kind of irritated me, because you look at some of these guys. I mean, you know, the smile, the look, you know, the arrogance, maybe, if you for lack of a better word, maybe the confidence. Confidence is a better
Confidence,
word.
yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. Even this picture here. I mean, look at this guy. I wanted to learn about this one here. Who is this?
So both of these are interesting stories. This is Clarence Bluen. The guys called him Blue. He was the executive officer of the squadron. And for those of you who are familiar with the sort of military order and operations, you're the disciplinarian, for lack of a better term. So your relationship with the guys under you is a little bit different, right? You have to kind of do the dirty work so that the commanding officer can still lead effectively and you don't have to have that kind of brusque, you know, I'm telling you what to do. The person who's really responsible for discipline in the squadron is the XO, and that was Bluen's job. As far as I can tell, he did a good job, and he let the guys sort of retaliate a little bit. There's a story in the squadron's war history, and actually Ed Ritter did another really excellent piece where they talk about Bluen strafing. He's going down over Japanese territory. He's strafing what he thinks is a tank, and as he gets closer, he realizes it's a mule or something. And so they kid him sort of mercilessly about this. It's in the squadron's official war history, right? And Ed Ritter does a drawing of Clarence Bluen going down, and he's got, instead of Rising Sun flags painted on the side of his plane, he's got like horses behinds, basically, in lieu of them. So as far as I can tell, though, you know, he was effective in that there was this give and take. He told the guys what to do, and they did it. And because, like I said earlier, that the exec and the skipper came from kind of within the squadron rather than coming in from outside and leading them, there were already some relationships there that he could work with that didn't, you know, he didn't have to be so overbearing or so detached as maybe some other execs would have had to have been in his shoes. So he's a really interesting case. He flew, you know, patrols off the Atlantic coast before becoming a fighter pilot and being a carrier pilot. And he actually rose all the way to command his own Essex class carrier, Lake Champlain, later in his Navy career. So he became a captain. He got command of a ship like Intrepid later on in his career. So he went really far, which is impressive.
Yeah, that is impressive.
I think what you said, confidence, right? Like as a fighter pilot, there's a stereotype associated, the fighter jock mentality, right? And in some cases, I found that for sure with some of these guys. I think Charlie Mallory was very headstrong. In other cases, like Cecil Harris, and perhaps this is why he avoided the spotlight a little bit, he was a school teacher from South Dakota before the war. He was quiet and a pretty reserved guy.
Is that this guy right here?
No, so that's on the cover of the book and on photo 2 and in photo 1, 2, 3, photo 15.
Let's see. So
flag in the background, 2 guys signing autographs.
Oh, hold on a second. Shoot.
Well, this is him too. But
where?
That one. Cecil Harris. There he is. The Navy's second highest scoring ace. So this is where my journey started, trying to learn more about him, because he was quiet. You know, Charlie Mallory wrote in his diary, which was an invaluable resource. Woody, if you're watching, thank you for sharing those scans with me. Charlie Mallory said, you know, Cecil Harris is going home a hero, which he hates. You know, he hates this thought of having the spotlight on him. He said over and over again during interviews, you know, this is a team game. This is really, we need to work together. And my wingman doesn't have my back. I'm not capable of doing any of this. We are not an effective unit. And as a result, he really loathed having attention called to him at the expense of the people around him. Newspaper men, when they wrote about him in the papers back home, wrote about how it was like pulling teeth trying to get quotes from this guy. And here he is, 24 aerial victories, the Navy's second ranking ace. So another thing that compelled me to delve into this story and to write this story, because these guys, they certainly deserve it. They put up the numbers and they went through a whole lot on behalf of their country. So certainly, the testament, the record of what they did deserves to live on and to kind of continue to remind us the cost of war, what people go through into today, across the branches of service. So
what if you were to rewrite or pick up this project now, and now you've written it, you've looked back at it, are there any areas that you would have diverted to that you didn't in the actual publication, or is there something that you missed out of?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I was literally thinking about that, Shane. What would you, after you've done this is your first book, right?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So Shane asked a really good question. With this being your first book, going through this experience, taking years, what would you do differently?
That is a tough question. So one thing about publishing this book is there are still siblings of these guys who are alive, right? To be able to read it and learn from it. Yeah. In the case of Bill Ziemer, who is one of the sadder stories in the Squadron, two of his brothers are still alive. Howard and Arthur are still alive. They're I think 101 and 99 or 100 respectively. And long may they live. I've met both of them. I've been to one of their birthdays. It's been really cool to meet their family. But I really wanted to make sure that those folks had a chance to read this story. So there was kind of a timer, right? There's an element of racing against the clock to make sure not only that my generation and future generations can read this, but the people who are still here at the sundown of the greatest generation can experience that. So I think, with your question in mind, it would be to take, I don't have the financial resources to just not work and to devote solely to the book, but to take time to develop some of the stories and relationships to an even greater degree. And where I can, to elaborate more on what's happening more generally in the Pacific. This book is very focused on Intrepid, the ship's experience, the men in the squadron, less so for the general reader, what's happening around them in the Pacific, the sort of context of what's going on. So I think if I were to do it over, those are elements that I would try to pull out and elaborate a little further.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Focus on the people more than the ship is what I'm hearing.
Or even more to some extent than the action reports, right? A lot of stuff that the things that got me interested in naval aviation history, a lot of them are really focused on the action reports. They're kind of a narrativization of the action reports, making them more readable and kind of interesting, but they don't contain a lot of information about the people or what's happening generally. I think that if I were to rewrite it, I would pare down even more from the action reports, even more from the air combat. For you fans of it, there's a lot of that in the book, but I would make it even more focused, I think, on what's happening aboard ship, who's going to mid-rats, who's getting that meal, that chow, right? Like I would bring more of that life aboard ship into the book. I've done some of that in the book where I can, and there's some interesting stories there about Intrepid going through a typhoon, and some other things that guys are going through, being tossed about. But yeah, I think it would be cool to dive into that even more, to go into more diaries that are in the collection of the Intrepid Museum. I accessed a few and pulled a few of those stories in, but even more of the enlisted men, the ships, the actual ship's, crew, the officers who are responsible for making this mighty machine that they're serving off of work day in and day out.
Cool. Yeah, that's very cool.
Fascinating.
Did Intrepid didn't go through Typhoon Cobra, did it?
No, that was later on in
Okay.
early October when Intrepid, you're moving from the fleet anchorage at Eniwetok to Ulithi. You're much closer to the action, but the downside of Ulithi is that it's this kind of wave whipped lagoon. The weather the men of Fighting 18 experienced there was much worse, and they actually followed a smaller typhoon than Cobra, but a typhoon nonetheless, towards the Ryukyu Islands, the doorstep of Japan, for those strikes on October 10th that really kicked off the big fireworks, the last great air battles, the last great sea battles. So they went through a bit of a typhoon in that first week of October that buckled in, areas of the bow, areas where the guys are sleeping. The junior officers' quarters are up there. Guys recorded, hatches being blown in by the force of the water in some cases, and water coming into their staterooms and things like that. So that was the one real bad storm, besides the kamikazes, obviously, that those guys weathered.
Yeah, I've heard Ulithi wasn't that great of a. I mean, the Japanese had truck. And then I heard Ulithi, the U.S. and allies had Ulithi, and it's like it was rough.
The members of the squadron were not happy. The war history says, like, to our everlasting disdain, they've developed Ulithi into a fleet anchorage, and we just kind of have to deal with it. And that was especially true because the guys were going from. They got a little brief stopover at Saipan where they took some whiskey and they traded it with Seabees, and they got to ride around in Jeeps on muddy, roads and trade for souvenirs with the Marines who were still there, digging, the remnants of Japanese forces out of the mountainside. But they went from this kind of sort of interesting place, with people of all sorts of services, to Ulithi, brand new, still being built up. The highest point of elevation outside of actual structures the Seabees are erecting is like, I'm from Delaware. Like Delaware would look like the Rockies by comparison, would look absolutely, sky high mountainous. And it just wasn't, it wasn't their idea of a good time. After Hawaii, after all of these different opportunities they had to experience how developed things could be in a kind of forward area, and we talk, Ulithi was really just not. It was not it. They did have Mogmog Island where the guys drank, warm beer and got to be in crystalline waters and see all sorts of cool coral and stuff, but that's not going to cut it.
We've been talking to Mike Fink, author of Intrepid's Fighting Squadron 18. We've been happy to have you on tonight to talk about the Intrepid. What's your next project? What's in the works for Mike Fink in the future?
That's a good question. There was a question earlier. I think Shane, you asked it about some of the people that I hadn't yet had success tracking down and finding their stories. Before the book, I had been blogging a little bit, sort of service-focused biographies about some of the guys in the squadron. I would love to continue that. There's a guy, Walter Passy, who was from Minnesota. He was killed relatively early in the squadron's deployment, and that's another thing that can sometimes make it hard to find information about these guys. I've been in touch with the family, but I haven't been able to form a strong enough or consistent enough relationship to learn more about him and what they know about him and what they can share and what I can piece together from the records. So I think I want to kind of continue with the Fighting 18 story. Publication was a big milestone, and I'm very happy to have their kind of account in a single volume for the families and for others who are interested in this story. But this originally started from an impulse to honor all of the men in Fighting 18. And I feel sort of restless. Like, the book is great, but it's not done. There's still some guys out there I don't know a whole heck of a lot about. And part of me believes if I just keep digging, and if I just persevere, if I open 30 tabs in my browser and I look through all of the newspapers and all of the everything everywhere, maybe I'll find a crumb. So I think that's where my heart still is. The book is fresh out, so it's still very new. otherwise, I still work at the Intrepid Museum. I love the ship. I love what the whole team does. So learning more about, I know a lot about August to November 1944, day in, day out, the people who were aboard, all of that. But it would be great to learn more about what came before and what came after, and maybe use that deeper knowledge, that longer sort of chronology, to learn new things about what stayed the same, what changed, how is the war developing, not on a macroscopic scale, but from the point of view of one ship, helping to push closer and closer to Japan.
Excellent.
For anyone that's interested in Mike's book, Intrepid's Fighting Squadron 18, head over to www.usni.org. That's the U.S. Naval Institute. And you can find his book as well as plenty of others at that website. Before we let Mike go, do you guys have any last minute questions for Mike?
Well, firstly, I just want to say that in the time we've been interviewing, I have actually gone and bought your book. So I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it. Can't wait. But yeah, no, basically most of my questions have been answered. But if I'm ever on Intrepid, should I ask for you as the tour guide?
Shoot me an email first. I still work principally remotely. I'm aboard ship when I can be, but live a state or so away. So I would love any of you guys, if you swing through the city, I'd love to show you around and learn from you, frankly, because you will have a well of knowledge that I can draw from and learn from as well. But anyone who's watching, if you haven't been to Intrepid, go now, go in March when Hangar 1 is revamped, go later on when more of the ship is open. There's a big project being undertaken over the course of the next few years where the museum wants to open more of the ship to the public, parts that have never been opened before. All of that is very labor and capital intensive. So I'm sure the plea from all of the museum ships everywhere, if you love what we do and you love this history, support your local museum ship. Chip a few dollars their way, because keeping them haze gray and underway is not an easy feat. So,
I did not create a banner for the Intrepid Museum, but if anyone wants to check out the Intrepid Museum, it's simply intrepidmuseum.org. You can also check out their YouTube channel. Simply search for Intrepid Museum. I want to say there's like 500 different videos on their YouTube channel. So there's a lot going on. They've got veteran oral histories. I was checking out some of them, the aircraft of the month. They also cover, and you mentioned the Corsair, they cover aircraft restoration.
Yep. There's an on-site team. There's an aircraft restoration hangar on site.
That's awesome.
Amazing.
So,
I know. Amazing.
It's
restoration team, right, at a museum ship.
It's lucky, right? It's a fortunate thing. Being in the city is helps to make that possible. But and it's great to work with partners at Naval Historical and elsewhere to kind of work in conjunction to preserve this history and make sure that it's seen and enjoyed for decades to come.
Well, Mike, thanks for being so generous with your time. Loved having you on tonight. Hopefully you felt this was worthwhile, telling us about your book. Intrepid.
It was great. I'd come back again.
All right. Well, we're gonna kick you off and talk behind your back. And so you have a good night in Delaware.
Thank you,
gentlemen.
Thanks,
Good
Mike.
meeting you.
Appreciate it.
Nice
Take care, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Have a great night.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Well, that guy was fascinating.
Absolutely.
You see, like, that's the thing. When you write a book, did you notice he just looks at a picture, he gets the person's first name, last name, because you're so in depth with writing a book.
And that was one of my, that's kind of why I was trying to ask that question. It's like, you get to know these guys through these photos, and then you get other photos donated from, say, a family or something like that. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I know who that is. Or he talked about that guy that's 6'4", and you could probably pick him out in any picture. It's like, oh, there he is. And so you almost get to know these guys.
It's an encyclopedic knowledge.
Absolutely.
And with my authorship, it's the same way. It's not a book as in depth as his, but you're involved in the story so much that it's just second nature. Like it's, and that's one of the best things that I love about doing enough research into publishing a book is, that you just have it all right there. It's just, it's a great feeling.
And I'm looking forward to reading the book. I love the personal stories, but you could almost tell that. Well, and he even came out and said it. It's like, well, yeah, there's so much more that I want to cover. Yeah. So there's a lot to the story. And quite frankly, I know what the Intrepid is. It's an aircraft carrier from World War II. And of course, I was fascinated with the cross catapult, but there's so much more when it comes to the personal stories of these guys.
Yeah.
And definitely check out Mike Fink and his book, Intrepid's Fighting Squadron 18. USNI.org.
And don't forget, for those of you that are joining now, we are going to be doing this all year long with different authors from the U.S. Naval Institute Press. And so, Mike, as he said very early, if you didn't catch it, he's our guinea pig kind of thing, and forward to glad we got good reviews, and it was great to have him on. Yeah. And we'll be having other authors throughout the year, almost, every month. And I'm very excited about one particular author potentially in October. So
no spoilers.
No spoilers. But so it's a really great partnership we've developed with the U.S. Naval Institute Press.
Yeah, if you liked what Mike had to say tonight, like Shane said, we're going to have more authors on with more exciting stories. So usnavalinstitute.org. All right, let's see. Moving on. It was fun to talk about the Intrepid, but now we have to talk about the Buffalo Naval Park. Shane Stevenson, curator at the Buffalo Naval Park. What's going on over there?
Hey, I'm just checking out this photo. Great. There's a lot going on this off season. So we are preparing for dry dock, and we always like to continue to stress that while we did receive $21 million, that money goes to the city of Buffalo. And then we have become the expert consultants as they've sent out the RFP for the project management team. 2 firms applied. They are interviewing them now. And then with our consultation, they will pick a project manager, and then the city will work with the project management team to then develop the scope of work, the dredging, getting the ships moved, timelines, budgets, things like that. So, but we are still in a survivability plan right now, and especially for the Sullivans. We're doing a destination dry dock series on YouTube. So one comes out tomorrow, and we've done a couple of them so far, and we'll be doing those every other Thursday as we get closer. And those are kind of like behind the scenes looks at the dry docking process and, conversations and things like that. I hope negotiations, but I know that, like our management, our leadership, Paul might say, well, we don't want to release that just yet, or you can release that. So we are kind of scrubbing things when we film meetings and things like that, just to make sure that we're not releasing anything ahead of the actual story. So we're opening March 22nd. We're going to have that St. Patrick's Day fundraiser again for the Sullivans, corned beef, cabbage, things like that. It's always Sullivan's beer, which is, I guess a good thing. And and then we open March 22nd, and away we go with the Hinza Symposium with the National Maritime Historical Society this year. I know that I've been working with a few people, getting them, if they want to give a presentation, getting that information to them. So, every day is an adventure.
Yeah.
To get a look at those videos that Shane is talking about, when it comes to preparing for dry dock, head over to YouTube, and in the search bar, simply look for Buffalo Naval Park, and it'll come right up. Also, you can check out their website, buffalonavalpark.org, to throw your support behind them. Of course, I always say, when it comes to the YouTube videos, one of the simplest yet most effective ways you can support these guys is simply to watch their content, subscribe to their channel, hit the like button. The more activity they get when it comes to the views of their videos and their content, it only helps them out tremendously. So by all means, become a subscriber, become a viewer of the Buffalo Naval Park. Let's see. Moving on to where is it? There we go. USS Slater. John Epp, curator at the USS Slater in Albany, New York. What's going on?
Nothing new really. Continued maintenance, restoration of a few compartments in the hold, and just chipping away. We have a slightly later opening day than Buffalo, so we'll be opening April 2nd this year. So we're getting towards the tail end of our off season, which is exciting. We'll get our tour guides back. It's always a lot of fun. Yeah, nothing new really.
Are you? I know your office is in the back of the ship, the aft end of the ship. But when it, during the winter, are you on the ship or are you off site?
Yeah, all of our officers, apart from Shanna and our business manager, are on ship. So Tim and I are on ship.
And when you go to work, what is the temperature of your office?
Monday mornings, since I don't let the heat run over the weekend, it was 28 degrees in my office 2 weeks ago.
And that's Fahrenheit, right?
Yeah. So we will have a short video coming out tomorrow. Tomorrow is the 81st anniversary of the ship's launching.
Okay.
So we'll do a short little thing on that as well.
Nice. I also want to say that we are partnering with the Slater this year, and we're going to be doing a joint ticketing event in honor of the Erie Canal's 200th anniversary. So a few of us have been working with Shanna, a staff person with John, and we're going to be doing a joint ticket. You buy one ticket, will get you to both sites, and you can travel along New York State and the Erie Canal. And then with it comes a challenge coin and some merchandise, things like that. So we'll be releasing that both with the Slater and with us probably around the May time, if I'm not. Yeah, I think maybe Memorial Day to Labor Day kind of thing. So we'll have those joint tickets available, and then you can traverse New York State and see all those wonderful locks and travel the Erie Canal if you're a maritime fan, and then visit both sites.
Yeah, Lock 1 is maybe half a mile north of the ship.
Right.
It's buried under a few feet of dirt in a building, but there is interest in possibly digging it up. I don't know if that will ever happen, but there's been talks.
Yeah. Well, that really spurned, and some of our videos and at our channel I've talked about that because I do find that history of the canal side area fascinating. And so, yes, Lock 1, a quarter of a mile, half a mile away from the Slater. The very ending of the terminus is right where of the Erie Canal is right where the stern of the Little Rock is at the commercial slip, and then away it goes up north and then east. So we are the bookends of the Erie Canal.
Really
This was Shanna's idea from Slater, and we're ever grateful that she thought of this. And again, challenge coin and tickets and stuff. So there's also like the Chittenango Museum that you can visit east of Syracuse that has some dry docks that they've uncovered, kind of like what you were mentioning. So they found some ruins, and then all of a sudden they're digging and digging and digging, and then these 3 dry docks opened up from when they would dry dock canal boats and stuff. So there's a little museum. I don't know about little, but there's a museum there honoring those 3 dry docks. There's a lot of stuff in New York State.
I should mention, shout out to one of our volunteers, Chris, Sunday tour guide. He has actually built us a rifle display. We have some rifles in our collection that have never been on display because there's just no room to display it on a small ship. So by the time we open for the season, we're going to have a new exhibit in our collection space with both American rifles and Japanese rifles that were acquired by destroyer escort sailors when they were in the Pacific. So we're looking forward to that.
Very nice.
What's
very cool.
What kind of rifles?
So there's going to be some M1 Garands, M1
Okay.
Carbine, 1903s, and Arisakas. And we also have a Japanese sword.
Holy, okay.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Make sure, as I'm sure you are, make sure those are really well protected.
Oh, yeah.
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 Mhm. Maybe
Only
maybe
2 people will have keys for it, shatterproof glass. You can only get on the ship with a tour guide, so
Oh, that's true. That's
Yeah.
the biggest. That's the biggest protector.
Yep.
Yes.
Acquired sounds so diplomatic.
well, that's John
Yeah.
from Armchair Commanders.
Yeah.
yeah.
You've
No,
Good to
what-
see you in the chat.
I wouldn't be surprised if Shane has photographs as well, but when the Japanese were surrendering island by island, and they would surrender a lot of times to just individual naval ships, like Japanese admirals will be surrendering to a lieutenant commander on a destroyer or a destroyer escort. And we have a few photographs. I forget the destroyer escort, but on their main deck, it's literally a pile from the main deck to the 01 level of just Japanese rifles that are being surrendered. And then you just tell your crew, all right, guys, take a
your
rifle or
pick.
two. Yeah. And that's how we got them.
Jeez.
Fascinating.
John Epp, curator at the USS Slater in Albany, New York. Check out their YouTube channel. Search for USS Slater in the search bar. Also check out their website, ussslater.org. Anything else you wanted to add, John?
We had a video kind of pop off last week on YouTube for us. Last I checked, it's up to like 30,000 views, I believe.
That's awesome.
That's great.
That's
Popping
awesome.
off.
Well,
Yeah, it's
what's
just
it
about the flying bridge on a destroyer escort.
Oh yes, I saw that. Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, definitely check it out. Like I said, you get to their YouTube channel. All you got to do is get to the search bar and type in USS Slater, and it'll come right up. Well, that's cool. Yeah, always good to see videos pop off for you guys.
Yeah, fantastic.
All right, moving on to where is it? There we go. So
Hello.
Connor up in Thunder Bay, he is one of the admins for the Museum Ships Facebook group. He also has been handling the questions and comments that you guys have been typing in. And tonight, Connor wants to tell us about this guy right here.
So, we are going. Who's typing?
That's Shane. And Connor, I'm going to leave
Not
you.
me.
I'm going to leave you in charge of the photos so that you can
Oh.
pop between them.
Wait, how do I do that? I've never done this before.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Seriously?
jeez. Nothing like.
Oh, there we go.
testing-
There we go. I
Okay.
found it.
Okay.
Nothing like
Okay.
testing it.
So, no, seriously, I've never done this before.
Well, if
So-
you hover your cursor over
Yeah,
the
I
screen,
found it. I found it.
okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure.
So, you can tell I've never done the photo side of things before. So, we're trying something new this month. Basically, at the end of our show, I am just going to do a brief summary of a ship in the museum fleet, whether it be in North America, United States, Canada, Mexico, or somewhere else in the world. I just figure bring some awareness to a lesser known museum ship. Wow, Ken just disappears on us. Okay, lovely. So yeah, what a jerk. So I am going to be talking about the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Acacia. And I chose the Acacia because she is a Iris class Coast Guard buoy tender. You guys remember last week's show? We talked about the ship that went to respond to the Edmund Fitzgerald, which was also an Iris class Iris class tender. So the Acacia was built in 1944. She was actually commissioned on the 1st of September, 1944, and she was part of a series of vessels which were built to do ice breaking and buoy tending on the Great Lakes, as well as other places for the U.S. Coast Guard. Initially, she was armed with two 20 millimeter machine guns, as well as a single 3-inch gun on her stern. But those were removed after the war ended, and she would continue in Coast Guard service, mostly serving on the Great Lakes, where she would be based generally around the Detroit area, mainly going up and down the waterfront not waterfront, but the area, just to keep the waters clear, as well as maintain the various buoys. But she did have some excitement outside of the Great Lakes. Let me just look at my notes here. Basically, she did go to the Mediterranean, not Mediterranean, but the Caribbean on a number of occasions. She went once in 1987 to 1988. She was assigned to patrol the waters around the Caribbean. And in one instance, she actually picked up 88 Haitians who had attempted to cross over to the United States on a 45-foot vessel. Then in 1994, after Fidel Castro said that anyone who wanted to leave the country could leave the country, she was then called out of the Great Lakes a second time to actually be involved with that. So she actually intercepted a number of people in that case. In that same year, Operation Uphold Democracy happened, which is when the United States intervened to protect the presidency of the president of Haiti at that time, and Acacia was actually sent in to do a lot of the buoy work around Haiti, in preparations for that operation. So she got some operations not just within the Great Lakes, but also within the Caribbean. She returned to the Great Lakes, and she would continue to serve until 2006, meaning that she had a career of 62 years. And she was actually the last of her class to be retired from Coast Guard service. It should be noted that a number of her ships in her class are still kicking. And she, though, is the only one that's a museum in the United States at this time. There used to be a couple others, although one has been scrapped and the other one is now privately owned. And basically, you go aboard, and she's a fantastic museum. What ended up happening when she was retired was she was handed over immediately to the state of Illinois, who in turn turned her over to the American Academy of Industry. The plan had been to make her a museum in Chicago, but apparently they were unable to get museum space for her. So what ended up happening was 3 years later, in 2009, she would end up being given to the... I'm trying to remember the name. Yeah, she ended up getting given to the Preservation of the SSC of Milwaukee Museum, which is a museum which maintains a last of its kind, I believe, train car carrier on the Great Lakes. Hold on, I have the pit. Here it is. This is what she looks like today. And she has been a museum here since 2009. And basically, when you go to the museum, I was there. These photos are all mine. You go aboard, you take a tour of the city of Milwaukee, which is 1930. And then afterwards, you get free roam tours of the Acacia. And I had a lovely volunteer give me a fantastic tour of Acacia when I was there a couple years ago. And it's a fantastic museum. So basically what I just wanted to do is, if you are in the Manistee area, which is in the northern side of the lower peninsula of Michigan, please go take a look and visit her. She's a fantastic museum. I believe they open in March, but for more information, definitely check out their website at carferry.com, named after the Milwaukee, or you can look up the SS City of Milwaukee on Facebook. Both those places will then have information about Acacia. And if you ever want to get a chance to go on the same type of boat that went out to try and help the Fitzgerald, well, you can go on her right there. Highly recommend it if you get the chance. Very unique.
Nice.
I see on her Wikipedia page that when she moved in 2009, she moved under her own power.
Yes, she did.
Do you know if she still moves, or was that the last time?
So I had a chance to talk with a guy who served on a couple of these boats. And basically, from what I've been told, is currently they don't have any plans to run her. At least last I was aware. But who knows? She's in better mechanical shape for sure than some of her sisters, because she's been mostly in fresh water.
Yeah, and running relatively recently. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How thick are these hulls?
How thick are the hulls?
Oh, pretty thick for ice on the Great Lakes.
I agree, John. Yeah, they'd have to be pretty thick, so pretty resilient if they're sitting there mothballed for a while.
Mm-hmm. I cannot. Hold on. Let me just bring up the Wikipedia. Let's see if it's written there. Icebreaker hull was a reinforced ice belt.
Oh, so it's not a complete.
No, so it's not a complete. It's not a complete
Okay.
icebreaker hull. So it's a reinforced. It's a reinforced hull.
Got it. Reinforced, but yeah, the whole hull is not going to be as thick. Okay.
No, no. These weren't as tough as say the Mackinac, which is another Great Lakes icebreaker, which we might talk about at some point.
Gotcha.
But yeah, fantastic ships. I love them.
Thanks for putting that together, Connor.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Anything else you guys want to add before we sign off?
Nope.
All right.
No, this is looking forward to this series for the rest of the year.
Yep.
Mike was great, and we hope that everyone keeps checking back and that this can grow, throughout the year. So it's great.
Yeah,
you guys are
support
gonna make
the
me
effort.
go so poor having to buy all these books.
Are you a member of USNI though?
I'm not. I was looking at the membership. I should.
Yeah, I have a 3-year membership, and let's say I won't give the prices, but for this book particularly, it drops $15 or $16.
It's pretty significant savings on this one book. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
I was willing to pay the full amount because, quite frankly, he probably deserves it. So,
well, and yeah, I wanted to say once again, thanks to Mike Fink, author of Intrepid's Fighting Squadron 18. He was great tonight. If you're just tuning in, you're gonna be fascinated with a lot of the stuff he has to say. And then, of course, grab the book. It doesn't sound like you'll regret it. All right, guys, it was a good episode. My name is Ken Stano with the YouTube channel History X. I want to say thanks to everyone for watching tonight, and catch us next month.
right.
Bye.
Not everybody. Thank you.
Oh crap! Hold on a second. There. Now I